Hi there. My name is David Yun, and I've built this podcast for all of us photographers looking for some extra inspiration. Every Friday, I interview local photographers about the how and the why behind their projects, and at the end of each episode, I add a thought or a challenge for both of us to consider as we continue our pursuit of awesome photography. You can help me keep this project growing by sharing this podcast with your photo-loving friends and by subscribing and leaving a review or a rating on your podcast platform of choice. Ultimately, the goal is to stir up conversation and thoughtfulness about photography as a practice, and I wanted to start each episode with a thank you. Your attention and focus on these artists and these conversations help the community at large keep growing. So, without further ado, welcome to my viewfinder. Speaking about having as many, lenses on the ground, the problem that I see is politicization. So, with the Russian influence of Facebook and all this kind of shit. Do you think the problem right now with photography might be that I don't have access to all the angles? If I open up the Calgary Herald, I'll get one picture and one narrative. If I open up, I don't know, what's more right-leaning? National Post, Calgary Sun. I don't know who's on the left.
Rebel.
I don't think there's a left and right anymore. Yeah, Rebel versus the Sprawl. Right. So what an editor or a mechanism will choose to put on and what articles they choose to write. You and I might be more capable of choosing to read both. I don't. I'm not going to put Rebel News on my algorithm, but
yeah, thanks.
Should I? Right? Is that how we get a balanced idea of photography? Getting literally both sides, a picture from both sides of the scene. Is that a way that photography can maintain some kind of diplomacy, fact-checking, rationality?
Yeah, and that's a good question too, because how do you deal with bias? Do you try to represent both sides equally? What does it even look like? Does that media, more neutral media outlets have failed on that in the past? Again, I'll bring up climate change, where it's do you report as though both sides of the climate change debate are equal, even that it's debate, right? Most scientists agree that it's a real thing. Do you give equal airtime to people who don't believe it? Because it's definitely a minority. It's not a scientific fact. Do you give air to both of those things? Generally now, I think the answer to that is no, because it's not balanced. Really, it might be fair, but it's not balanced. There's some markets, every country deals with this differently too, in terms of bias. The United States, Canada, Great Britain, they all deal with bias differently. Great Britain, they lean really hard into those biases. When you're reading a right-leaning paper, they're not gonna hide it. But then you kind of do end up falling into those echo chambers, because you're right, the average person just has their one thing. At any time they perceive an alternate take, they'll just discard that immediately. Whereas Canada, we try to be more fair and balanced, but even then people are you read the comment section on any Herald or National Post or Globe and Mail story, and it's all just bashing. It could be a story that's totally unrelated. They're just bashing the other side, right? So, they try to be fair and balanced in Canada. That's a thing that we're taught in journalism school, is to be, try to represent both sides of things and to be critical of everything. So, again, there's no real good answer to that, but I think that the danger of making forming echo chambers when you do have really polarized media, in theory, in a perfect world, everybody reads everything and it'll present a story that's kind of somewhere in the middle. With photographers on the ground, that might be the case, but then when it gets sent back to those outlets, how does that jive, right? That doesn't necessarily translate all the way from shutter click to rolling off the press or publishing on WordPress or whatever they're using. So yeah, again, I don't know if there's a good answer to that. A lot of this conversation is just going to be going, I don't know, man, if I had this figured out, they would be paying me a lot more.
Well, maybe the trap is it is truly an unsolvable issue. Maybe part of the human condition in itself, but yeah, I don't know. My Viewfinder is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network is a program to support Albertan podcasts by connecting us with local businesses and initiatives to keep our stories and our interests at the fore. If you're interested in finding more Albertan podcast content in a wide range of topics, check out their website, albertapodcastnetwork.com, or you can connect with them over social media. They are at Alberta Podnet on both Instagram and Twitter. This episode of My Viewfinder is brought to you by the Calgary Foundation, proudly supporting community needs for 65 years. Empathy, kindness, generosity. We are united in our desire to give, to inspire hope, and transform the lives of people who are struggling in turbulent times. The Calgary Foundation is here to help. From mental health programs to environmental causes, the Community Knowledge Center website features profiles of charitable organizations, all searchable by area of interest. Be inspired by compelling stories. Be informed of innovative work. Be responsive to the needs. To connect to hundreds of outstanding charitable organizations serving our community, visit ckc.calgaryfoundation.org. To learn more about Calgary Foundation, just visit calgaryfoundation.org. Last week we met Stefan and learned about how his focus and work in photojournalism comes with awareness of both the positive and negative impacts images have on the public discourse. This week we wrap up our talk with some musings of his personal projects and staying passionate in a field that can be pretty draining. Frankly, I don't think this is restricted to journalism or photography, but modern living in general. How do we stay involved in our passions when burnout is so common? Let's find out how he does it and see if there are any lessons for all of us. But just moving away a little bit from I feel like we're pushing too far into the politics. Do you shoot personal projects outside of the journalism world?
Yeah, I do. I do shoot for all my personal projects. I actually shoot film, but most of them are just really benign things to relax me. I'll take photos of things that are discarded items and then try to write little short stories about them, just to kind of keep my writing and photography sharp, and kind of try to exercise my atrophying imagination as I get older. Trying to prevent that slow decline into Alzheimer's maybe. I mean, it's kind of fun because there's no pressure on it. I don't think many people are ever going to see them, maybe. They're kind of just for me. And I think that's also an important thing in photography, too. We've been talking so much about how do we use photography to influence people, or how does photography influence the outside world? But I think that within your own personal group, or even with just yourself, your own photography can influence you, too. Because it definitely makes me slow down, look at things in the world that I see, because it's, you get the road often traveled syndrome, where you take the same route going to work or going to pick up groceries again and again and again, and you just, your brain just tunes that out. But if you slow down and actually look at things, you start seeing light, you start seeing problems that maybe you didn't know about, or maybe you discover something about yourself. You're going on little adventures. I think during the pandemic, that's really important, because it feels like, life is stalled out for a lot of us. So putting those little adventures on yourself is really important to do. And I think really rounds out your life a little bit. So, sometimes I'll just go out and take Polaroids of things that are on the street and then try to write little short stories about them. I'm really bad at it, but that's okay, because you don't need to be great at something. And you learn more about yourself when you're trying a new skill a lot of the time. I mean, get back to me when I try knitting. That's going to be terrible. I'm probably going to just hate myself for trying that. My wife might try to teach me, who knows? I don't think she has the patience for that, though. Yeah, so I do personal projects, and I love seeing other people's personal projects too, especially the ones that they published. Louis Villanueva, he's been on your show before. I used to see him all the time when I went to the camera store, and when I moved away from Calgary temporarily, he came to my going away party. But I always try to support his work when I can. And he published a book, and I was like, I'm on it. I got to have that, because it's his personal photography. I want to see how he looks at the world, and it was really interesting. I still have it here, actually. But I love being able to support my friends in their personal projects. And I think that kind of goes around, because it's really a lifestyle for all of us. Sometimes it's almost a religion for people. So, buying their Bibles and reading what they're all about is important. when you put your work out into the world, people learn a little bit more about you too, and you learn a little bit about yourself.
I don't know, maybe everything we do in action has a spiritual connotation because it relates us to the environment we're in. I guess I asked that question just because it's interesting to hear that you're out and you also are engaged with using the camera just to be in the world. Even the camera's a funny thing because we're kind of separated, literally by the lens. So there's one bridge between, so a found object or, a castaway glove or probably a lot of masks right now. And, there's a difference between going down and touching this likely, contagious piece of shit or taking a photograph or walking by it. I love the idea of breaking apart from, we may twist back into social commentary, but the sort of norm we have of just living this structured industrial life, right? Like you get up at this time, you go to this place, you take the same route because it's the most efficient. Photography is a great opportunity, more, I think, because it can be so casual than a lot of other hobbies, to take an extra turn or to try to find a different way to walk through if you're engaged in it. Yeah, I like this idea that it's relaxing.
Yeah, it doesn't have to always be just a slog. And pressing a button, especially if you're using a Polaroid, it requires, maybe I'll offend some people, it requires no discipline compared to other hobbies. Really, you just how hard is it to grab your camera, set a exposure comp on a Polaroid and just press a shutter button? Sure, you might waste a few frames, but you're gonna get something that you're probably at least kind of happy with. It's not you're woodworking or knitting or crocheting or something where you have to swear at it by dropping stitches and things, unless you're developing film, in which case it's very eye intensive. But that's another story.
Does your wife use a camera? Or has she been turned off by you? Yeah,
just the camera, right? No, she occasionally, she likes to photograph, but she is on the end of, she doesn't want to put, she already has a hobby that's very technically intensive. Might say a hobby, she loves to knit. So it's very, very intensive technically. And I don't think that she has photography can get very technically intensive too. I don't think that she wants to go into that as much, especially because I'm so obsessed with it. Although recently, a little bit about that, I noticed one of the little talking points is who's your favorite person? And I'm like, well, it's going to be my wife. I mean, I also have to say that, but it's funny because she had a bit of a creative journey herself that's not really associated with photography, but kind of has made me re-examine my creativity. So she went to school for a Bachelor of Business Administration at Mount Royal. That's where we met. And then she also got into a grad school at Queen's in Kingston, which is why we moved here. And then, kind of when COVID hit, she was like, well, do I go back to Calgary? You have a job here. What are we going to do? And we decided, why don't you just take a post-grad course in user design? Why not? Because she used to work for Benevity in Calgary. So she just she was always one of those people who you don't, there's two schools of thought really when you go into a job. Do I go into a career because I love it, or do I find something else that I want to do that'll just make me money and that I can pursue my passions on the side, right? And I was always kind of I gotta do what I love for my life. I gotta jump in head first. This is what I'm doing. I'm a photographer. I'm a journalist. This is who I am. This is what I do for fun. This is also what I do for work. I got to pursue my passion because I can't work somewhere where I am not interested in what I do. I just can't force myself to do it. That's why I love my job right now, because I work as a videographer at Queen's. So I love doing that. But she was always going I can tolerate stuff that I'm not super interested in. I'll do a good job anyway. And I'll just do what I love on the side. But then she found design and immediately was I love this. I wanted this for a living. This is amazing. And for me, that kind of realization happened earlier when I was in my teens. It's so interesting to see how that can happen to someone later in life, especially because my dad's a graphic designer. So she has a mentor now in her father-in-law. It's not the stereotype where you hate your in-laws. Her and my dad talk a lot where I'm are you guys going to be best friends now? This is funny. So it's been interesting, and it's kind of maybe re-examine why I do what I do. And it's also an infectious attitude that you really feed off of being around. You had that earlier. I'm just kind of coasting off that high from my teens where I'm still going to keep it going. But then seeing that happen to somebody later in their life is a beautiful thing. And people should try different things, really, like whether it's photography, even if you're a photographer, try a different type of photography, put some obstacles in for yourself, try developing film. We're not going anywhere. You can still buy all the stuff for it and learn. Maybe you'll find something that you really, truly love. And a lot of times for me, those kinds of things will inform other work that I'm doing. So I'll be out doing something, and I know that she does the same thing, where she'll be doing something that she loves, and then suddenly it informs the work that she's doing, and you find solutions that you didn't really know were there before.
My thought while you're speaking is this essence of maybe the human condition of the term creativity or creation. I mean, it has, of course, biblical and religious connotations, but as people, at least of our ilk, there's something empowering, isn't there, of like building something, be it an image or a graphic design or like a model. And I often joke because the one profession that I know I'd be terrible at is like accounting. So I often tease accounting. But like, I am sure that people who love it find ways. Like, I remember when I was young, I don't know if this is still fascinating, but I saw someone make Tetris operational on Excel, right? There are things you can do outside of the typical stereotype of a job or of an action that are creative inherently, and there's something empowering about that. I think that's what I've been missing in photography a little bit, which is that sense of magic. Like that it doesn't even need to be valued by somebody, that there's just some power of going out and hitting a shutter. But I am doing a little bit of light YouTube design, like video production, podcasting, layout. I'm trying to make a book. Yeah, learning that stuff is fascinating, and it does change the way I shoot. I think when I get back outside, I'll let you know whether I take pictures differently.
Yeah. I mean, it can always change the way, and like, it's okay if you evolve with it. And I think it's okay if, there's periods of time where you don't create anything. I think that people create things, when you're making dinner, for God's sake, you're creating something. You're always kind of making sometimes creative decisions. Do I use garlic salt or do I use turmeric? It's probably terrible because I don't think those things are interchangeable at all. I just outed myself as a bad cook too, probably. But, you're always making these decisions and you're creating a little bit, right? So I don't know. I think it all kind of just adds to this wonderful fabric of our lives that really we can always take a part in, just make sure you show up to it. But, then again, if you have depression and mental health issues, or, have anxiety and panic and all those things, I want people to know that's okay if they don't have time to do it. It's fine. Or, there was a time where I had a panic disorder too. I'm just kind of coming off of that in the last couple of years. But there was a time where I just didn't do anything. I also think that was greatly contributed to because when I was in Calgary, it was really hard for me to find work in terms of work that I really wanted to do. And a lot of it was just personal projects. But if all you're doing is personal projects, and then, well, at least for me, if all I'm doing is personal projects and then just working at a retail job, I just feel like I'm not making an impact or helping anything other than myself. And I just it really stressed me out to the point where I just had a bit of a breakdown. And I think, this is going to get into a whole bunch of political stuff too, because I graduated from Mount Royal, tried to apply to all these kinds of jobs that I would love to have done, but then they would always get snapped up by people who were 10, 20 years more experienced than me that got laid off of the oil sector. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do here? I was working retail at the time, which is fine. I really enjoyed that. But then I was like, I still need to find meaning in my work and create something, because I do tie heavily my own personality to photography, to being a journalist, to telling stories, because I don't just take one-off pictures. I need to, stories are important to me. So I'm not kind of the person who tells a story in one photograph. I need to tell stories in a series of photographs, or have a photograph accompanied by writing, or being able to have sort of a project. I like the adventure of it. I like the being able to put on your boots and go out and shoot something to its completion and tell a complete little novella, right? But I wasn't doing that. I just felt sort of dead inside, and it kind of led me to, amongst other things, start sleeping less, diet gets worse, and suddenly you're at a breaking point. But I'm in a good place now, which is great. But there's a struggle for a lot of people out there who are creative, who I think is very similar. I know lots of people who, when I was going through this, I really reached out to people. A lot of creative people, like at the Beers and Cameras, I remember talking about this. It's like, guys, like, I don't know what's going on with me. And they're like, oh yeah, like we all have very similar problems. And you'd be surprised about the struggles that other people around you are going through, especially creatively. I think that's why it's such an important thing for me to support my friends and what they're doing. Like if a friend of mine creates a book, I got to buy it. If a friend of mine is like, I had a friend who's a designer who created, like, he started selling t-shirts. I have a friend who's in a metal band or like he runs his own metal band. I don't even really listen to metal, but I like went and I shot some of his recording and I bought his album and I listened to it. I learned about him. I thought it was fascinating, but everybody's going through their own issues in terms of this. So I think that it's important to be able to support people. I think if I could tell the world one thing, it's just like support the people around you. Try to like lift them up as much as you can because you never really know what they're going through.
I was just talking to Jennifer Sandver and she brought up an interesting description of podcasting as the rebirth of civilian journalism or whatever it was. And I thought it was an interesting take, you know, this idea, like the iPhone. The iPhone is the new street photography camera, but, you know, you get this viral movement of some, like all of this, let's say right now, as of April 2nd, right now it's anti-Asian. I mean, it's really just hate crimes. I think it's class warfare. We'll worry about the definitions of all that kind of shit. But right now,
can't it be all? There's room for all kinds of crap.
Yeah,
it is class warfare.
So right now we have this trend of people iPhone videoing random people punching old Asian grandmas on the street. So it's raw in that it's seemingly unedited. We don't get a lot of context because they tend to be small clips that are tailored towards Instagram or tweets or TikTok, wherever the fuck these things are coming up. Often by the time you take your camera out, something has already occurred. I mean, it's not like, unless they're staged, I don't have my video running, hoping that I'll catch some asshole doing something insane. So it's interesting right now, like how much information photography is giving everybody, or video. I mean, it's a great, I need to try to find somebody who does film. The correlation between photography and video is fascinating too, giving it life. But I think there's even more bias with video than there is with photography. I mean,
yeah, I love talking about photography and talking about ethics, especially in photojournalism or journalism where people actually want to and don't just say vulgar things about their subjects, like that AP photographer. I won't name him, but I was very surprised. Yeah, I'm really, it's nice to be able to chat with people who are invested in the art and doing the right thing and trying to figure out and wrestling with these topics too.
Do you think that, I think you've kind of touched on this too, the length of time in which a story is told must affect its perspective? Because if I meet you in the first, so we've just met, and if I make an assumption about your character, but then if we continue to meet over 10 years, that's going to evolve how I tell the story, maybe what photograph I use to demonstrate. Do you find that, with the work that you do, both on personal projects, with wanting to make sort of long form narrative work, is that something that you're conscious of? Is that something that's important? Or do you think we need information as quickly as possible to make different types of decisions, whether it's for society or for our personal position on stuff? How do I get to choose my best life, Stephen? I mean, help me figure my life out in one last word here.
Oh man,
what's the best way to tell a story?
Oh man, that's tricky. Well, in the same way, I think that we're all different people throughout our lives. I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. Even your cells, are swap out every so once in a while. I think that if you're undertaking a long-term project, you have to be okay with pivoting a lot. Especially like now with COVID, it's changed a lot of the long-term work that I've been doing anyway. So, for example, doing this long-term project that was up in the north in Grand Cache, that started off as I didn't even know there was the Mountain Métis. I'm going out to learn about them. Here's what their businesses are. It's the lifeblood of that community. Here's their, a lot of kind of like cultural translation, a lot of finding things fascinating. And, also they do a lot of guiding, and I wanted to explore that and then share that with people. Sadly, I wasn't able to get to that yet. But now, I mean, if I was going to go back today, the story would look totally different. It would be, like how has COVID affected the lifeblood of the community with their guiding? Like a lot of different things, like how that community is responding to it. So I think with people doing long-term projects, if you're just doing the project with one thesis, that's fine going across it. But if you're a journalist too, as well as a documentarian, and there is sort of a distinction there a little bit, I think that there's a considerable overlap, but it's not always the same thing. I think that you can also splice up those long-term projects into shorter stories, because sometimes you find something that is really self-contained that you can tell in like a shorter term, and then give that to people and publish that in a more shorter term place, but as well as doing a longer term projects. But the things that you see are going to change your original, not necessarily a hypothesis, but, the things that you kind of had set out to do, like you might change that 10 times over the course of years. And that's fine. The same way that, when you meet somebody once, you get like a little snapshot of who that person is at that time. But that person is a living thing. And sometimes the stories are a living thing too, where they're constantly changing. I mean, the stories are about people, and people are always changing. So, why shouldn't your stories? And I think that's a responsible way to do it, not just to stick to a hypothesis that you're still trying to prove that's never going to be proven anymore, because the people have changed. The story has changed. Things are different now. The same way that your opinion of a person now might be one thing, and then in 10 years when you meet that person again, or over the course of 10 years, something might happen where maybe your opinion is going to change. So I think that time really does change a lot of things about a person. There's a lot of cynical people will say like, oh, like people never change, stories never change. I don't know. Having done a lot of long-term projects, I think that people do change who they are, especially if you're young. Like I don't think the same things that I did when I was 15, when I was 20. I mean, it's not to say that you shouldn't be responsible for those things, because you are that person, but you are also a different person who evolves and changes. So yeah, I think the important thing to do is to stay with it and kind of celebrate the change, really, just to not get stuck in one mode of thought. I think, things like relationships are like that too. You got to make sure that you're, rolling with the punches there.
So would you, at least for yourself, think that an important part is to publish or put out pieces with the courage to suggest that you can pivot? Because I do feel as well, like if I want to keep something in a pot for 10 years, it's going to fester a little bit too. But like, maybe as creative advice, either for potential photojournalists that may stumble across this podcast or just other creators, do you think, is it better for me to just let people know where I'm at right now, or to wait until I'm confident enough to tell the full story as I see it? Do you think that your experience has given you an idea that one is more important than the other?
Honestly, I think it's situation specific. I don't think there's any one universal answer there, because if you publish a part of a long-term project too early and then you publish it later down the road, people will be like, I already saw that. What's new? Who cares? You could publish that in a gallery. I mean, this is if you're looking at even publishing this at all, right? Or just putting it on your Instagram or chasing likes. But we live in a medium-rich world where there's so many different ways to tell so many different types of stories that you could look at something and be like, I think a podcast would be great for this. Or I think a couple of interviews would be good for this. Or I want to sit down and do a video interview with this person. At the same time that you're taking pictures of the community, or you're taking pictures of a story, or even in my case, I do a lot of local news stories right now. And a lot of that is actually informing longer term work that I want to do. For example, I'm covering a lot of housing stuff, which might seem really boring. Sometimes it is, but it's also leading to like a lot of social issues that, there's not enough housing for people. So how do people who are in lower income brackets deal with that? And there's not a lot of visual, at least in the community where I'm living right now, there's not a lot of visual representation of that. So in a way, I'm already kind of publishing that work, but it's not really metastasized yet to the point where somebody would be like, oh, I've already seen that. I'm taking what I'm learning and the connections that I've made to try to make a larger social impact over the longer term, which certain smaller communities don't have. So I'd say that creative advice wise, if you're looking at a longer term project that you want to publish as a long-term piece, like all in a package on its own, don't publish it early. What you could do is, if you're trying to pitch that to somebody, shoot a little bit on your own as a proof of concept first, kind of like, this is what I can do. This is my idea. Here's why I can do this. And then bring that to someone that you want. Might be a gallery, might be Globe and Mail, might be whoever, and be like, here's what I can do. And then keep working on it because they might not take it, but it's still, if there's something they're really passionate about, don't necessarily give up on it right away. Although this could be expending considerable resources on your part too. And you might just end up having to self-publish it. But if it's something you're really passionate about, resist that urge maybe to put it up on Instagram right away. Work on other stuff concurrently, because a lot of journalists, like I'm working on, I have a note page full of 8 different projects I'm concurrently working on. And some of them are short-term stuff. This is why I think it's also really important to make some short-term projects to kind of show what you're made of, and then also be working on long-term stuff. So you kind of scratch that itch of publishing something right away while also working on something with larger impact, because things generally tend to have more impact when you're publishing it all at once rather than just increments. Yeah, you really just have to make the decision for yourself. But I would discourage people from, jumping the gun a little too early.
So basically, I need to start more projects.
Well, if you're a person with ADHD like me, that means that I'm just I never finish a project before I start a new one, which is kind of a bit of a good thing in my line of work, in that that's what you're kind of supposed to do. You're supposed to have all these plates spinning at once. But for a lot of artists, they're I can never finish one thing. I got to always go on to the next thing, and next thing, and next thing. But, you maybe use that as a strength, if there's something that interests you, go for it. And then come back to another project when you're feeling ready. There's no pressure unless you're, on a deadline. I, for some reason, picked an industry where I'm constantly under deadline. But if you're an artist, unless you're on commission, you don't really have that pressure. The only person that you're putting pressure on is yourself, really. So, go nuts. Why not? Have fun with it. That's why we're all in this, right? We're just supposed to be having fun with it. If you're just miserable trying to make work, why? I actually talked to this novelist for a story that I was writing, and she's like, I hate writing. I hate it so much. And I'm like, why do you do it then? She's like, I hate the act of writing. I love going to the places, and I love talking to the people and doing the research, and I like the end result. I love having written, but I hate when I have to sit down and my editor's on my ass and just pounding it out, and you're 8 cups of coffee in, and you want to just jump off of a bridge. And I'm I feel that. When I'm writing about City Hall stuff, sometimes I'm oh my God, why did I go into I basically am a person who's wanted to have homework as a living for the rest of my life. I'm kind of I have to, because I have editors that are where's your story? Where is it? And I'm I'm doing this so that I can do longer term stuff. It's fine, but it's tricky that there's always pressure, right? So it's just learning where you can best support that pressure is the trick.
It sounds like good advice, whether you're in journalism or not. Just trudge through the homework part, because it's important too.
Yeah,
informing.
Sometimes you gotta take the pills. It might not taste very good, but you gotta take them. One of the reasons I took so long graduating from undergrad is because I could never find the right balance. I could never find the right balance of work and school, and I was in the military for a little time, so that I had that all at once because I just took on too much, and it just I crumbled under the weight, and I just kept doing it, and I'm why is this not working? Said 22-year-old idiot me, where I'm why am I doing so much and I'm still unable to do it? I don't know why. And I'm constantly withdrawing from things and not wanting to get out of bed, face the day, because I have 80 billion things to do. I did it to myself. Learning where to say no, learning where how to balance your own schedule took me forever. And I feel some people are like that too, where if you're finding that you're not having time enough in the day to create or to do those things, or you're finding that just under too much, it's okay to drop a couple things. Not everybody's. I think everybody looks up, at least it's for me, I was pressured pretty early to be an overachiever, where I needed to be constantly doing 80 things at once, doing them all really well, and being a prodigy, doing awesome things. But not everybody can really sustain that. Maybe for a short term, but you get the burnout quick. So when it comes to creativity, if that's a reason to be, don't burn out, because you can put your camera down for a really long time. That's sad, because people like me, I want to see your work. I wanted people to like, I love going on Instagram and like checking out the cool things people do, whether it's bad or whether it's good, but I'll add something. So somebody out there wants to see it. And it's okay if that person is you, and that person should be you. It's okay if you hate your own work, because that's a step to making something better.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yay!
Yeah, we did it.
We did it.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that is interesting or would help.
That's great. Yeah, if it wasn't interesting, we wouldn't be here talking still.
I think I'm going to hang up on
the phone. Yeah. So I appreciate your time. I think that was great.
Totally.
Yeah, thank you. This week I've got a message for you from Rumi. Cold drafts, flickering lights, and where's that leak coming from? If you've ever wondered what's really going on in your home, Rumi's Ask a Home Inspector service can help. Connect with a certified professional home inspector by phone or video call and get your questions answered. Rumi will let you know what's easily fixable with a little DIY, or when you might need to call some professional help. Visit rumi.ca, that's RUMI.ca, and book your Ask a Home Inspector appointment today. I think the best part of meeting Stefan has been to learn the mindset of someone dedicated to a lifelong passion and a field rife with tension and immersion in the world. It's also been important to learn of how he developed and continues to develop a balanced approach to living. It's draining to commit absolutely every ounce of energy to prove abstract things to abstract people. I think this is one of the main forces behind burnout. Many of us grow up thinking we need to do more and produce more and do all this stuff all of the time. It's a very industrialist culture where output has to be measurable and comparative. But Stefan's experience has taught him differently. Putting down projects and stress can, ironically, increase our capacity to do more projects. It's an odd thought that taking a break may be essential not only for our own mental health, but our ability to sustain our passion over the long term. As someone who's continually collapsed my life over and over again, I think there's important insight here. I'll have to consider just how many projects and pieces I'm trying to juggle at any one moment and see if there are a few that I can put down. Take the worry away that putting it down might be permanent. Honestly, if I never pick it up again, should I even have been carrying it anyways? Let's take moments to evaluate what really brings us empowering action. And as the husband of a KonMari consultant, an avid supporter of this method, let's ask ourselves what brings us joy. Not money, not accomplishment, not accolades, joy. And perhaps we'll be inspired to push ourselves